Hello, my name is Matt, and last time we were modeling Cross's law office in Unity, so we're going to continue this process with the final part. No matter how far I get in this video, we're going to call it quits just for the sake of time. So that means even if I have more things that I want to detail or do to this level, I'm just going to do them off camera, just because it tends to take a while. I think this will be a really important step in understanding my level design process. So I'm excited for all of you to see it, and hopefully it'll be a fun journey. So I've gathered a lot of objects here in between episodes. Some of these I've made from scratch, and others I've just modified from Shinogi Chess Club, one of my previous games, just to make them more modern day and less futuristic. So I made this barrier here, which is going to act as the wall trim along the side, similar to this kind of stuff that we see on the edges of the room. This desk I imported from Shinogi Chess Club, which actually got imported from Burden of Proof originally. This was Conrad's desk, so it's made a journey. It's been modified for Shinogi Chess Club and then modified a bit again for this game. But it is the same model that's been carried over from 2018, which is pretty funny. I've got some desks just because they're in the same file as this larger one, and I figured might as well bring them in even if I don't use them. Have some other trim pieces, a cabinet, and then these curtains, which I don't know if they're going to fit correctly there, but we'll find out and do the best we can with it. I think the most obvious change I can make first is to do the trim on the side of the wall. And actually before that, I did notice something when I was going through some of the other levels that are in the game, which is that this room by comparison feels a little bit small. And it might not seem that way when we're looking at it, and I know that it's the correct dimensions compared to what we had in the first game because I did the measurements, but that doesn't mean that it's going to entirely fit the aesthetic of the other environments. So I was working on this courthouse lobby scene in between episodes, and as you can see, it's kind of like a massive room. It also matches the original dimensions of the lobby from the original Burden of Proof game, and maybe just to make Cross's law office more consistent, I'm going to expand the size of it, because cutting right from this into this tiny little space is a little bit jarring. So it's nothing too extreme, but I was thinking that I could just maybe move this wall and everything else along the x-axis to extend it a little bit. So I'm going to hit move tool and then X to lock it to the x-axis, and then let's go for a specific amount, like, let's start with just 1 meter, actually. I'm going to extend the ceiling to match. Yeah, GX, and then -1. Same for this floor. No, this is the ceiling. GX -1. Alright, so they're all shifted over, giving that room a little bit more space. Actually, this middle point of the floor is there for a reason. Okay, so doing that also means that the UV is stretched incorrectly, so I'm going to redo that, scale it up to about what we had before. And this is going to cause some difference in appearance, but it's better than trying to fix the stretching by hand. I'd prefer to just redo the unwrap process and then try and match the scale at least so that the tiling stays the same. Okay, save that. There you go. That just gives us a little more room in here. This is going to be even more important because I feel like some of these prop objects are going to jut out, reducing the floor space. Like if there's something here, then there's even less walkable area. So this is kind of a trick I used in the main courtroom as well, because there would be the audience stands just sticking out from the side of the wall. It gives more depth to the space when you have the walls pushed back further than they should and objects lined up against it, to create kind of like more detail, rather than just being a wall corner. And when you're looking at it from a distance, it's first you have the objects that are lined against the wall and then the wall. And that's a little bit more interesting to look at, than trying to keep the objects like very close to the wall in order to keep the floor space manageable. Or I'm just justifying a random change that I felt would be good here, but that's okay. It's art. It can be whatever we want it to be, and we don't have to come up with reasons for why things are the way they are. Since I moved the wall 1 meter, that means this whole ceiling partition has to move, I guess, 0.5 meters in order to stay lined up. Was that 1.5 meters? Sorry, 0.5 meters. Yeah, 0.5 meters. Let's see what it does. Yeah, that looks more centered. So when you're entering the room, it's like that. I guess this kind of also makes the window important to be moved, so I'll just do that on that. 0.5 meters, and then all these wall details. And that's the magic of using exact units when you move stuff. That way you can just mathematically cascade for everything else rather than me having to line it up by hand. So that was a small change. It might not even be perceptible if you didn't know that it happened. Oh yeah, breaks the UVs again. I'll just fix that. And the ceiling also changed. So you might not even notice that it's there if it wasn't for you knowing that I did the change, but it'll make a small bit of difference, I think. So let's just go with it. And then all these, I think these do have to be lined up by hand, I guess. Unless well, it's too late now. I'm just gonna keep it. They don't have to be exact. As long as they look mostly even. Even on this direction, maybe. I'm gonna say that's good enough. Okay, so now that we've done that, I feel a little more confident placing these wall barriers. So I built these to represent the little trim that happens, the separator for when this wall changes. So let's just take a look. Here's Conrad in all of his glory. He walks around. This is useful for getting the height correct on all the objects. So we take a little tour. Here's a random drawer cabinet thing. He's got the most uncomfortable office chair sitting in front of his desk with a clipboard, and got a file cabinet, a bench for some reason, 2 very square sofa chairs, smaller file cabinet, glitching ambient occlusion, this door, which is kind of like paper separation, or glass maybe. It's probably just modeled right into this thing. And just more random stuff thrown into here. Pretty empty, I would say. I'm going to aim for more stuff to fill out this space in the new game. And then we have this tripod, piece of evidence. I don't know if I have this model ready though. Okay, so there's not much. Oh yeah, and then this little shelf that's just perfectly flat and made up of like 8 polygons. So now it's my job to translate this into something that we can work with in 2025. So as you can see, I've already got a more updated wall barrier. It was about half height on cross. So I might want to scale it. I think just a little bit. Let's just go for that. And then I'm also going to apply the default scale so that all the other wall pieces that I paste down will be at the default for that prefab. Just line up the first one. And then, yes, I'm sorry, this is going to be just a process of pasting objects in. All across this room, so buckle up. So this process, by the way, of like filling out the room with smaller pieces, like modular components, is something that I kind of shied away from on my older games. For example, when I was making the original Burden of Proof, I just didn't want to do this. I didn't think this was part of level design, so I'd try and find some weird way to like cut down on the amount of work by like pasting a decal to like add some dirt to the corners or something like that, or just trying to find the right texture. Probably tiled it not enough times, but just other ways to save time. And what I've realized is there kind of is no way to save time on doing this. Just if you just put more time into fleshing out how it looks with objects and stuff like that, just don't be afraid to put down more stuff. Obviously in moderation, because you don't want to overwhelm on the detail, but rather than just like modeling 4 walls and saying, yeah, the room's done and I don't know how to make it look more interesting, we'll just look at references and see what other rooms do to make things more interesting. I probably found the idea for splitting the wall into 2 somewhere. Maybe I reused it from the references I looked at for the courtroom scenes. And I probably just did that for the original Cross office. And I can say that was much better than just trying to avoid doing that in the first place. And I guess my approach to making these props and stuff is a little bit different nowadays, because when I made that like wall trim section in the original game, I probably just modeled it directly into the room, and I didn't have like these objects that I have now that I'm manually placing by hand. So that was another way in which I tried to avoid spending more time on it. But also, me doing it this way is pretty helpful because it allows me to hone in on one of these objects and just put a little bit more care and detail into like, what does one of these section points look like? I mean, as you can tell, this little piece here, despite it not being too impressive, you know, it's just a couple beams going down. It's definitely some sort of improvement to whatever this is. This is just a texture slapped on a polygon with a top border. I mean, that's what modern graphics kind of is. It's just more attention, more detail, and more matching of reality on every little piece that you can think of. I don't know if that made sense at all, but that's what we're going to go with. And this is kind of a technique I learned partially from watching development videos of other people make levels. You might see like time lapses on YouTube and stuff like that, where they just go in and build a level in Unity. I guess I should say I've always found them interesting because they showed a lot of just manual placement of stuff. Just like someone sitting down and looking at like a perspective through the camera to create like a composition. And then they place down props that they have and they just keep doing that for like hours on end. And that's really what level design is. And it's hard to explain the difference from what I was doing before. But like before I was placing down objects when I felt they needed to be there for some specific like story purpose or like to create, I guess, a core shape or idea of the level. And nowadays I'm understanding that there's a lot of work that goes in just making the wall trim, right? Like there's attention that has to go into kind of like every corner of the environment in order to make it feel like someone has worked on it. And another random note about those time lapses is that I feel they often skip the more challenging aspect of level design, which is knowing what props you need and actually making them and creating the textures and art assets that you then pull from. That's kind of blending two different skill sets together, level design and then just 3D art, I guess, material creation, things like that. But as a solo developer, you kind of need both, and they kind of have to go together. For this back wall, I'm gonna lower the trim down. I don't know if I did that here. No. Because it was all just one piece that goes all the way across. So on this, I'm gonna lower it down, because otherwise, if it goes right up to here, I don't know, it feels a little awkward right now, so I'm gonna just make it lower so that we get a nice border from the window itself. Probably helps it stand out. I don't have to be too careful when lining these up, but make sure there's no gaps. You might notice also that these pieces stick out. Just kind of hope that no one notices that. The way to mitigate this would be to either put something on the outside that can kind of act as like a stopgap, or just in here. You know what, I will do that just in case, as a good example. I'll just scale these slightly, an imperceivable amount, but enough to meet the wall without needing another piece. And that way we won't have geometry that's outside the level. There you go, that looks alright. And there we go, I placed a wall trim along the floor. It's looking a lot better now, actually. Maybe this back stuff could shrink a little more into the ground. This one here. Just to further emphasize this gap. Because at this scale, without us getting into further detail, it makes sense to leave all of the shapes at a large scale, right? Because if I'm looking at it back here, I want to be able to identify that, yeah, that is meant to be a gap and not just a mistake in me placing the tiles. So large scale pattern at this level, and then as I get further in detailing, we can focus on the small scale patterns. One last note about placement that I wanted to mention is games like Planet Coaster, Planet Zoo, have actually been inspiring me recently. I realized those games are entirely level design. You're just placing down scenery items to create a cool theme park or zoo. And it's actually good practice for making things look correct and understanding how you can fill up a space to detail it without going overboard and without running out of ideas. Since they give you a lot of art assets to play with, you can make large-scale details and smaller details and kind of blend the two and figure out what works best and what makes good compositions from a lot of 3D angles. So if you are interested in level design, I think just building a zoo in creative mode will help a lot for understanding how objects are placed in 3D and what you can do when you have a lot of assets at your disposal. So anyways, now that I've completed that, I'm going to place the desk. Let's make a new holder object. Large objects. The desk in. Oh, it's something's wrong with it. So I can tell because the LOD symbol is all the way over there. Let me open this up. Oh. There we go. Recalculate bounds has done that. And I'm going to apply that. So I guess when I made this prefab, the desk was in another position, and the LOD group was picking up that the two LOD variants of this object were sitting at a different spot. And then when I moved them to correct it, it didn't update the bounds. So that fixed that. Well, maybe I should make sure that none of these other objects have that issue. If they did, it wouldn't be a problem. I just have to go into the prefab and recalculate the bounds, and it'll apply for any instances that I've placed. Okay, yeah, they all look good, so it was just this one. I'll just line it up like that. Looks a lot smaller now with the room being bigger, but I could either double it up, do like a double desk to kind of give that illusion of being the most important thing in the room, or I leave it humble. Thinking about it, this is a really awkward setup for a desk, just staring at the wall as people walk in, all the way in the back here, but that's what it was originally, so better stay true to that. Let's turn off these other objects just to get a feel for it. I want to say that Cross is humble, and he wouldn't have a double desk. But you know what else I could do? I could scale it up. I'm going to scale it a little bit, just so that it has more weight. I could even scale it this way a little bit more. And yeah, that's going to introduce some stretching, but for a tiny amount, no one's going to notice or care. Except now you might, because I've just told you that I stretched it, but please don't let it bother you. So that's fine. I'm going to leave it there for now. The other idea I had was to do a trim on the top of the wall as well, separate it even further. I could either do that using these same wall pieces. That would probably look alright. But I think I might use this instead. Yeah, let's see how it looks. I'll place it here first to make sure that as I'm duplicating them in order, they don't have to extend past this side. If there's a color problem, I could always change the material, or if I wanted this material not to be shared, I could even split these all into their own variants and make a new material and so on. The possibilities are endless, but unfortunately, again, we're going to be placing objects across the whole length of the wall. These are a little easier because I built them such that the end piece juts out a little bit more than the other side of it. Like if you notice this, one side has this little extra part that comes out, and then this side is just flat. That means I can stack them against each other without having to worry about z-fighting. Z-fighting is when two objects perfectly overlap. I'm not sure if it's easy to show it here, but like if this intersected with the wall, then you get kind of a flicker where the depth map can't sort the two, and both objects are fighting for visibility. So in order to avoid that on these bottom pieces, I had to move one of these out a little bit. So you can see they're not exactly aligned, and even on here you can see some z-fighting. I'm sure that problem exists in a lot of places now, but I'll just do what I can. Oh. Something as small as that, it's okay to leave it. Again, nobody is going to notice. And if they do, they're not going to say, hey, your game has z-fighting in a tiny pixel on the corner of the room. At least I hope not. You never know. Could be that one negative review rolls in on Steam. The z-fighting analysts show up and pick apart every tiny little object that's in your game. That's like my worst nightmare. There's other ways of fixing it too. Sometimes you can even do it in engine, depending on what engine you have. I'm sure there's maybe like a jitter function that you could run to like make sure that none of the objects are ever going to overlap. Or just get a more stable depth buffer. But with the limitations of Unity, that's not happening. I think it's fine. Just double checking. Alright, back to placing objects. As always. But the neat part is the level's coming along a lot faster now. Because I think these shapes add just a lot to the overall look. I think I got the idea for using these like segmented wall panels from this obscure level design video where someone was trying to remaster the Star Wars MMO, The Old Republic. Whoever it was like placing down a lot of metal panels that they had modeled onto the ceiling, and I just looked at that. Must have been in like 2019 or something. I watched that video and I was confused, like, man, how can they spend so long just putting down stuff into a level? And it also kind of blew my mind at how detailed it was making their project, and how far they're willing to go with their, I I guess, performance budget, because I had always thought that if you were placing down objects to this degree in a space like this, that it was going to tank the performance of the game. But that's really not the case. You'd be surprised at how many objects game engines can handle. Besides that, there are a lot of tricks that I use to make these more optimized. One example is the GPU instancing feature that I've toggled on this material. That means every time the game tries to render it, it'll basically send one set of instructions to the GPU, and the GPU will be responsible for placing all of the instances of it, rather than having to send separate draw calls. This is a feature that Unity has, which really helps out a lot. I don't know why they don't talk about this more often in their tutorials. But it kind of works as like a replacement for dynamic batching, which I used to rely on in older versions of Unity, and I don't think it works quite the same in URP. So some larger objects that I know are only going to be rendered once or take up a lot of the level geometry also get the static flag, because I think it's going to be faster to just bake them in rather than to instance them. I think it's actually slower to try and use the GPU instancing feature on just a single object, because you're doing a little bit more work to send a potentially more complicated instruction set to the GPU, even though it's only going to be rendered once. My general rule of thumb is if it's not GPU instanced, then it should become static, as long as it's going to stay still. If it is going to move and there's only one object, then that's one of the rare cases where I'll just leave it as default without any optimizations. Anyways, it's a big sidetrack, but here we go. Room is looking a lot better with these trims. And the key is to make it seem as though the trims were always there, part of the installation of the room. And I think it works. I'm even putting more care into this than when I'm not recording, just because I want to seem like I know what I'm doing. It's pretty nice. And already, can do a quick comparison here with that versus this. So it's starting to become more clear how we're on the path to something greater. Key differences, by the way, are that there's more detail. These tiles are higher resolution. The panels and stuff use more granular shapes. There's a smaller bevel. There's a mixture of patterns, so as opposed to just one flat texture along all this. I know we have boards here that kind of break it up, which is kind of nice, but there's nothing breaking it up in the vertical direction. And here we have not only vertical pillars to break it up, but like, well, as I keep saying, a pattern. You have this wider version of a pillar with these small little detail objects jutting out, and then the smaller pillars every, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. So every on every 6th small pillar it becomes a large pillar, just by enforcing that simple rule into the geometry of the level. We've given the illusion of something that's way more thought out than what we originally had. I'm not done yet. We're far from done. I actually got further than I thought in just a short time. So let's keep going. Okay, these filing cabinets might be a good target for something to do next. Let's see, I actually don't have a filing cabinet. I just have this. which is for a lab room, so that's not quite the same. So here's a good example of we need to make a new prop object. I didn't have enough. So maybe before I do that, I'm just going to place this. I can kind of picture this being here, probably. Let me see what I have. Oh, it's nothing. Okay. So I'll just make a executive decision and say that looks fine. And I don't want to just have one on this level. That'd be a little awkward. So let's see if it can go somewhere else. Maybe here. So it's something that big, you want to consider the visual weight of it. Now I know there's going to be a file cabinet on this side, so I think that works to balance it out. And originally there was this instead. So maybe I can still bring something like that over as well, but yeah, I like that there. I don't want to go crazy with it just yet, because I don't know what other objects I have, so I'll leave it like that for now. Maybe let's see how the curtains fit first as well. These curtains I brought over from Shinogi Chess Club. That's... okay, I actually don't know if I like the color of... I mean, Cross has a specific color theme that applies to him, which is faint green on his vest there, and then black and white. Hence why his office and the courtroom was green, and the UI elements. So if green doesn't work, then maybe this like black and white look could be better. I don't think he would have black curtains. No. But maybe this color is too bright. I want something that kind of just blends in, like you don't even know that it's there. We're kind of almost back to white now, but that's fine. Let's see if we have two of these. Does it look weird? No? I'm kind of okay with that. Might be because I had to scale it, that some parts are stretched. I'm not going to bother with any cloth simulation or animation on these, just because I don't think that it's worth it. These scenes are very limited. I might actually want to even these curtains out, because I don't like that this gap is like clearly mirrored. Okay, so let's take a look at them. I'm in the file where I made all those objects. Two things you gotta do. One is make sure that these flatten out. I'm gonna grab that. I'm gonna turn on proportional editing. And just scale it on the Z, or sorry, on the X axis. That's going to make it a line. So if I do it completely, it just becomes a straight line. I don't want to do it so much, but you want to get the idea that it's more flat, and same kind of goes for this side. In Shinogi Chess Club, these curtains framed the clubroom windows. It was kind of nice for them to be very dynamic and have a specific pattern to them. In Cross's office, I kind of want to make them less obvious. I want it to be more of a subtle thing that just kind of enhances the window and doesn't detract from, I guess, the main view to the outside. So making them less crazy. More flat and still and boring, just like Cross's soul. That definitely fits more the look that I'm going for. Might even just shrinking them down a little bit. Yeah, I think that works. They quite clearly blend into the background. And frame these exterior views. Okay, they are floating though, so we'll fix that by plopping in something here. I do have this generic shape, which I've called a grab bar. I would use this in Shinogi Chess Club to kind of like line up things along the ceiling, just for interest. No idea what purpose they could be, maybe to like hold a screen projector or something like that, but it's just a general basic shape that has come in handy for creating certain stuff, and they'll probably fit in pretty well right here. That's another important aspect of creating levels, I would say, just having a solid library of shapes that you might need. I've already done a lot of that work. Some from my past games, as you know. That's a Shinogi Chess Club shape after all. But others that I've made for this game, and then I just keep building up my collection of objects that I've modeled. I just get more and more options as I go. So that actually fit way better than I thought it would. Just add another one. And again, add a principle just based on like the details and stuff. It's always going to look better when I have two of them placed, because it creates a gap and it lets the polygons and tiling be smaller rather than trying to scale one big one that holds them both. It'll depend on, I guess, what is needed for the specific scene that you're trying to build, but here I think two works way better. That's pretty good. Okay, so I dug through some of the Shinogi Chess Club files and found the old file cabinet that I think I used. This is actually ported in by another project, which probably ported it in from yet another project, and now it's here. So I'm going to work with this. I guess customize it, make sure that it's all good. So I'll change the name. This is a radiator as well that I found, and then this larger cabinet. I'm not sure if any of these would fit properly in Cross's office, but I'll probably use them somewhere, so it's good to just have them in this file. So I've got all the materials prefixed with the law office name now. You can see I've split it into a few different materials here. I'm just tinting them in Blender so that I can tell which face is assigned to what. I do like to share materials a lot because it helps reduce the work and reduce the amount of draw calls, or depending, that is sent to the GPU. This one has some odd things going on with the shading. As you can see when I go to here, it's shaded smooth, so it looks as though it has like a line going across, and really this whole face should be flat. I could just shade it flat. And then we get this awkward bevel cut, which I'm not as fond of these days. But apparently I didn't mind when I made this just yesterday, so it's fine. Maybe I'll just decrease. This is flat, and this should be smooth. So It all comes down to whether the normals are flat or smooth. It's going to determine how the object is shaded. If I kept it smooth, I probably would have wanted to create more vertices against the edge here in order to make the shading look more correct, because with more vertices pushed that way, it's going to make this smooth edge much more sharp, make it look more like the surface is flat. But I can avoid doing that and increasing my poly count by just shading it flat. So that's what I'll do. I want a larger file cabinet as well, but I can maybe do that by just stacking 2 of these on top. How many? Yeah, it just had 4 over here. So there's kind of no need to make a small one and then a large one. I can just make a small one, and then when I need to make a large one, I'll just stack 2 small ones together. Same principle as plopping down all these panels. Just create larger, interesting silhouettes with smaller components. Let's see, they're already UV unwrapped. It's way too huge. This one's not small enough. Actually, I'll just redo it. I think there was a difference in how Blender unwraps things, which is a little bit more, yeah, it's a little more compact these days. They've improved the algorithm. Last thing I want to do is to create LOD variants, and you probably didn't see this last time because we were working with base geometry. But when I'm working with prop objects, it's more important to create the lower level of detail versions, and then you'll get to see that process of how I set it up. So first thing I'm going to do is take the original high poly model, and I'm going to hit Alt-D, which creates a linked copy. A linked copy means that any change I make to the original will also persist on the linked copy, but it is a separate object, which I'll move to collection 3. I can get between the collections by hitting the number keys. On collection 3, I'm going to give it LOD1 instead of LOD0. And just as an example, you can see that when I change one of these and go to the other layer, it's changed the other object as well. So that is proving that they are indeed linked. And you can see that under the mesh data. They share the same mesh data. They're called plane 03, which is not very good. It's a little confusing. So I'm going to call it small radiator underscore mesh. You can see that it's used by 2. I mean, for the most part, I don't care to name these because I don't have to like shift around the mesh data. I just hit Alt-D and then basically forget about it once I've created the level of detail variant. But for something like a character, I will try to make sure that they're all named, and that's important for being able to assign them correctly. Like I can make anything the small radiator if I really wanted. So that's why that's useful. You might be wondering, if they're linked, how do we make this version less detailed? Because if I was to go in and start smashing through polygons, well then the original one is going to lose detail too. The key difference is that what I've done is linked the mesh data, but not the object data. They're 2 different objects, they just share the same mesh. So that means I can add different modifiers to each of those objects, and despite the mesh data being the same, they'll result in a different object when exported. So for example, if I was to get rid of the bevel, well then suddenly there's a whole lot less polygons on this version of the mesh because it's not being beveled. It's not splitting the edges into 2. But on the original, it still is because the bevel modifier is still there. So LOD0 and LOD1. And if I wanted to go further, I could add more modifiers that affect the geometry, like this decimate, which basically reduces the amount of polygons using an algorithm. So with this, kind of eliminates the smallest size differences first, leaving the large scale pattern the same, and at a distance, you wouldn't be able to tell that those polygons are missing, which is kind of the whole point of level of detail, right? Like, when you get further away, you want to use less polygons in that small space, because they're going to end up writing data to the same pixel, which is very inefficient. I'm not sure if a decimate is really necessary here, just removing the bevel might be enough, but I'll leave it. Let me see. 1,366 polygons and 1,226. The shape's pretty much still intact there, so I'll do that. Alright, then it's just the same process for all these. Make sure to use underscore LOD0, and then Alt-D, move it to layer 3. Rename it, and get rid of the bevel. That's fine. File cabinet small, LOD0, law office prefix. Alt-D, move it to layer 3. Rename it. Move the bevel. I don't think decimate could help all that much. Maybe it can. Oh, what is this? 70 polygons? It's probably not worth it. Okay, that's fine. So now let's bring that stuff in. So just like how I did with the base structure here, I'm going to extract the materials into a folder. I'm going to drag in that whole file in. It has brought in all of our other objects, which I already imported, but we don't care about those. So I'll unpack the prefab to make sure that it's unlinked. Get the radiator, the cabinet, and then the file cabinet. Just drag it out, delete that, hone in on the file cabinet. To create one of these prop objects, I want to make a holder object that holds both LOD variants. I'm going to call this law office file cabinet small. And then I'm going to have to add an LOD group, drag in LOD0, LOD1, so that when the camera reaches a certain spot, it switches to the lower level of detail. I will delete LOD2 because I don't need it. When the camera reaches the culled point, it's going to just get culled. It's going to disappear for performance, so I'll drag this way out. I don't want it to disappear until 0%. Then LOD1, let's have the transition at like 10%. You want to make sure that it's not too noticeable the moment when it switches those two models. And then even further, in the new URP versions, you get to have crossfade. So I'm going to switch the fade mode. I'm going to click on this and increase the transition width. Same for this one, just by a little bit. And then you'll maybe be able to tell, rather than just popping into the new model, it fades out one of the models using a dithering pattern, and then the other model comes into place. There's some other things going on here, like the shadow cascades popping, but I think that's alright. And if it's not alright later on, I can always edit it. Start with this metal, which is going to be pretty smooth, so I'll just choose any one of these metal shapes, get rid of the green tint. Find a better metal. Nope. Could even be concrete, you know, no one has to know. Oh, that could be something. Pretty much just looking for some small amount of details and like scuff marks that make it more interesting, because for the most part it's going to have this metallic slider. Might look weird if it's too metallic. It is going to be pretty smooth. Get a normal map, but not that bumpy. Just a little bit. And occlusion map. That looks kind of fine. I don't have that many good metal textures. This is a much higher resolution texture, so I can get away with a smaller tile. Make sure occlusion map. Might even want to tile this other one more. Not only is it lower resolution, but it's an occlusion map, which probably has some blur applied to it, so I want to make sure that it's not looking pixelated. I want there to be some normal map detail, but not so much that it looks bumpy. Not that you ever see it from that close up anyways, but pretty happy with that. Alright, and then because these are things I might be using a lot, I'll use instancing. Get a box collider on there so that you don't walk through it. I'll set the material to metal, and then I would say it's done. So I'll just drag and drop into the folder. And we just repeat the process for everything else. I know this part is also tedious, but it's one of those things that you just have to get used to, setting up prop objects. So I already have instancing, so they need a physics mesh. I'm going to use a mesh collider. When I apply it, it'll just automatically grab the small radiator mesh. I'm using it on the LOD1 version because it has less polygons, and that's going to make a more performant physics shape. So that's another benefit of having multiple LOD variants, because the lower resolution ones are going to be better for physics. Right now there's all these little grooves are physics shapes, which you would probably want for something like an action game where there's going to be like bullets flying and they have to go maybe in between these two parts of the mesh. But for a game like this where you're just walking, I'm going to take advantage of the convex option, which gets rid of all those little grooves. It's going to reduce the poly count a lot, and it's going to make this physics mesh much more performant. So as you can see, it has matched the shape pretty well. I might even be able to get away with the box collider here, but this is just a good example of how I can use the mesh collider to sort of wrap around whatever mesh I've created while still keeping it viable for the performance of the game. Drag in the radiator, and I have all of these objects to work with.